Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It is a joy to be with you today. We've got a lot of hot topics to cover today. Well, a couple of them. Freedom of speech. We're looking at MSNBC fire, or certainly take away the solo shows of progressive anchors. What's going on with that? What are they doing? What is happening? And what about Mahmoud Khalil, the young Palestinian activist who is a graduate student? He has permanent residency, a green card, but he is being threatened with deportation, and his wife is 8 months pregnant. So, how is that supposed to work out? I mean, and who can you criticize? What can you criticize? What can you say in the United States? Not just today, hey, Bernadette, but what can you say? I want you to, and then we're going to talk about Rahm Emanuel once again. Politico came out with a big article today about his plans, his reported plans to run for president. Now, those of us who live in Chicago have heard that his greatest ambition has been to be president of the United States. How will that work out in the wake of Laquan McDonald? He's offering up some excuses for why he covered up the murder of this boy. I want to hear what your thoughts are. So, everybody, like and share, like and share, like and share. Will he be able to run for president? Is there anything that he could say that could make you see him differently? But that's in the next hour. Right now, we're talking about free speech. Free speech. We had heard that the Trump administration was going to crack down on, namely, protesters, demonstrators who were supportive of the Palestinians. But now we're seeing it happen rapidly. Well, one thing I will say this about President Trump, he does come through on his promises. Everything he says he's going to do, he does it. Dr. David Gibbs, The Revolt of the Rich. I cannot wait to continue to have this rolling conversation we're going to have with you about your book, because we saw this Tesla. Before I even get into this, because I'm going to ask you about the Tesla at the White House, but first I want everyone to meet me on Blue Sky at santitajackson.bsky.social, and I'm on X still at Santita J, and I am also on Santita Jackson and Friends on Facebook. Please, everybody, meet me there, not on Santita Jackson. The only place I can accept friends is at Santita Jackson and Friends. And then, of course, the Santita Jackson Show. Hey, Josette. Hey, Velma. Hey, Bernadette. Everybody like and share, like and share, like and share. So let's get right to it. Before I get into censorship and free speech, just very quickly, what did you make of the Tesla rolling up on the White House grounds?
What did I make? Well,
yeah, what did you make?
We all know, obviously, the intense role, extremely central role, it seems, of Elon Musk, and the very questionable nature of this role, given that he seems to be almost having a level of influence above that of the cabinet, even though he had no Senate confirmation, which is the standard thing for government officials at a high level. And so he's essentially operating off the books. And he does seem to be dismantling large parts of the federal government, including vital programs, to ordinary people. He's eliciting a lot of pushback and a lot of resentment, rightly so, in my view. So I think the Democrats see this as a real opportunity to really undermine the populist credentials of Trump. Trump, of course, has run repeatedly as a man of the people. He's going to oppose elites. And here you have one of the most elite figures on the planet Earth, certainly one of the very richest, possibly the richest, who seems to be the top figure in his administration, who's undertaking actions that can't be viewed as altruistic. He's not doing this out of the goodness of his heart. This is going to be very good, what he's doing for people in his social class, for the very, very rich. So I assume that the whole issue of the Tesla, the politicization of the Tesla, is part of this image of for and against Elon Musk.
Well, it's unbelievable that, you saw a particular car from a particular company roll up and it's, well, please, Rahm Emanuel was endorsed His political career was given the kiss of life from the White House. So look, I go like this. My hands are up in the air. I don't even know what to say. But let's talk about free speech. We're looking at MSNBC, release some of the most high profile progressives from the airwaves. And we are watching Mahmoud Khalil, this graduate student who was organizing uh, protests that were really anti, it was they went against the slaughter of Palestinians in uh, in the West Bank and in Gaza, and now he is looking at being deported.
Mm.
It's so cruel. I mean, his wife is 8 months pregnant, and I saw her on television today. I can only imagine her upset, particularly while she is in this condition. Um, it would be a horrifying thing for anyone, but for someone who's about to give birth, what
Mm.
should be the happiest time of her life is fraught with so much sadness and pain. So, what do you make of that? I mean, has it come to this where we put people out of the United States because of protest? I mean, Paul Robeson was, well, I mean, I guess we have seen this before, but talk to me about that.
I'm sorry. Do you
No,
want?
oh yeah, what do you make of that?
I'm terribly sorry. There are fighter planes flying overhead, and I
Oh,
could.
okay, no worries, no worries, no
We have,
worries.
we have a big military presence here, and anyway,
Well, that's okay. I don't know what that's about, but
it's a regular thing here. Anyway, I just
okay.
a very high pitched screech going overhead. I'm sorry. So you were asking about free speech just now, yes?
Yeah, I mean, just in the wake of what we're watching, the AP, and you can have your questions about legacy media. I understand that. I get it. Uh, but I'm looking at, the whole White House press corps be reordered. And, quite frankly, it should be because media has changed a great deal.
It has.
Uh,
That's
but,
right.
the reasons for pushing out the AP are interesting. At the very least, they're pushing them out because they won't call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. Okay.
You don't like that. You don't like that, Santita. You don't want to call it the Gulf of America. I'm just joking. Um,
The Americas, I can live with that.
yeah, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. Uh,
The Gulf of America, we act like we're the only country in the Americas.
yeah.
That's like not smart. But I mean, and really, I don't. It's a colonial, it's an imperialist mindset.
Mhm.
But I don't know if we ever got rid of it. So I mean, so what do you make of this? I mean, because you can't say anything. We already knew that Facebook, yes, and social media flip your algorithms when you are progressive.
Mm.
I was streaming millions of people a week. And I guess the more progressive I got, the more my audience got squeezed.
Wow. Interesting.
No, yeah, well, I'm not, that's not going to make me change.
Right.
You know, they own it, but I think it's a public trust.
I
And
think
what they're doing is violating it.
what I'm seeing in general is a tremendous erosion of the whole idea of free speech. And it's kind of ironic that the Republicans had been complaining about the lack of free speech in the Democrats, which had some legitimacy, a point I'll get to in a moment, but now they're doing the same thing. And so I think the basic operating idea here is free speech for me, but not for thee. And free speech is good only when people are saying things that I want to hear. I'll be very specific about this. In my classroom over the last 10 years, I've seen a real dramatic erosion of free speech, and people, including myself, are afraid to say things. Most recently, of course, in Israel, Gaza, or Israel in general. And I'll be specific about that. I teach U.S. foreign policy, so I have to discuss the Israel-Palestine issue and how the U.S. fits into that. And I repeatedly have had students in the last year come up to me and tell me in a friendly way that I really should watch my step because there are groups on campus that monitor professors like me. And I could get into a lot of trouble if I say the wrong thing on this issue. It's blatant intimidation, of course. And one specific issue I have is that I was showing a clip from Israeli television in Hebrew that was criticizing Israeli policy. And a student came up to me afterward and said, well, I'm Jewish, and I have to tell you that I feel very unsafe in class when you say things like that. It makes me feel unsafe. And with the implication, I guess, that if it makes them feel unsafe, whatever that means, I shouldn't be allowed to do it. So the biggest threat to free speech at the moment in the classroom and nationally as well is, of course, any critical speech regarding Israel-Palestine. But there are many other issues. Before that, I do remember I couldn't. Santita, are you still there?
Oh, yes.
Okay. You disappeared. Your image disappeared from the screen. Anyway, you're still, Santita, you're still there? Santita? Santita, I've lost you there.
I said the wrong thing. Okay.
Right.
Maybe that's it too.
And maybe you're being censored here. Anyway. What I have seen is for the last 10 years in general, issues related, for example, to transgenderism. I criticized not transgenderism, which I have no problem with in principle, but the idea of enforced pronouns. I regarded that as silly and said it was silly, and I got into trouble for that. So I can't say that either. Generally speaking, the whole issue of Ukraine has been a censored issue. The Democrats do it as well. You had Tim Walz basically talking about there is no right to free speech with regard to hate speech and disinformation. And you have to read the First Amendment here, Tim Walz, because actually that is protected speech under the First Amendment. I don't like hate speech, obviously, but the problem with hate speech is that it can be defined very broadly. My students in class who like criticizing Israel as hate speech. I'm sure they would say that. I think the best policy, in my view, is free speech for everybody, including speech you don't like.
Isn't that what free speech is?
I'm sorry?
Isn't that what free speech is?
That's my view, yes. But people who want to repress speech say, well, I'm for free speech, but I have these exceptions. For example, disinformation. And I get to define what disinformation is. Hillary Clinton said on TV, we need prison terms to consider prison terms for people who spread disinformation.
I have to let me just engage you for a bit, because to me that's not free speech. When you're doing all this limiting, I have to listen to people say all manner of things, and you know what? I do it because I want to have my say. Not only because I want to have my say. We say we believe in free speech, but when you come, because I had a teacher who came up to me in high school. I had a similar experience. This happened in my Harvard interview, which was awful. I've talked about that before. You heard me speak of that. But when my parents went to the Middle East, I didn't talk about it. I didn't talk about my parents. I talked about my parents the way people do talk about their parents, but I didn't talk about Jesse Jackson. And because, I mean, I never related to him that way. He was my dad.
Right.
And I did not say, well, my father and mother are over in Lebanon right now meeting with Yasser Arafat. Those kids didn't know who Yasser Arafat was. And what would I talk about that for anyway? Right?
Yeah.
Well, I remember Mr. Rosenstein. Yes, I'm saying it because it was his name. And he was my teacher. He stopped me in the hall and he said, Santita, in a very, very soft, friendly kind of way. But I knew what was coming. I just knew it. And he said, hands in the backs of his pockets and his little corduroy pants. He said, you've always been such a good student. So nice. And I've always admired how you've carried yourself. You've never led with your father and you're an excellent student. Blah, blah. He said, and I kind of heard that you were talking about your father, bragging about him being in the Middle East, meeting with Yasser Arafat. And I just wanted to share with you that would be offensive. I said, I've never talked about my father. And I certainly didn't talk about his work. Dr. Gibbs, I'm my father's oldest child.
I see.
Jesse, Johnny, and I grew up with the very controversial Jesse Jackson. He was so controversial that my parents had to send my brother, his namesake, away when he was 11. Do you know how that broke their hearts?
Mm.
They didn't want to send their baby away to school. But my mother said they would have eaten him alive because there was real hatred for my father. We had the Chicago police who stayed in the front, and a private police security, a private security firm that lived in our house with us.
Wow.
That's all. That's my whole life.
Wow.
I mean, past my 20s, that was my life.
What
So I was
photograph?
like, so I understand when the student walks up to you, and I didn't tell my mother because I knew my mother was out, my parents were out of town. I remember that very clearly because I did not go home and tell my mom. I knew that if I told her that on the phone, she would have been on the next plane and she would have met that man in school the next morning. And my father probably would have been with her. And and I'm just wondering when you talk about free speech to me, and I need you to help me with this as an historian, as an academician, isn't free speech is for us to have the opportunity to speak freely.
That's right.
And if you don't agree, you don't agree.
That's right.
But you have the right to say to say your piece. I don't like what the Proud Boys stand for, but they have the right to have their say.
Yes, they do.
They do. I mean, they do. I mean, okay, George Wallace had his right to have his say. I'm not going to stand in the way of that.
Right.
I know by the time I'm finished saying what I'm going to say, I know I'm right because I know you're wrong.
Yeah.
But I don't understand what's going on here because now we're talking about deporting people from the United States, and he's a permanent resident, and we're talking about jailing Americans
Or expelling them from college, that kind of thing. Yeah, really
Yeah.
punitive actions. Yeah, it's getting kind of ugly. I would say it's part of. I certainly blame the Republicans for being deeply hypocritical on this because they spent years criticizing cancel culture, and to some extent with justification. I kind of agree with that critique up to a point. And here they're doing exactly the same thing. They're doing exactly the same thing, and they don't really have a principled leg to stand on. On the other hand, it is true that before the Republicans came in, the Democrats were also doing their
Yeah.
version of cancel culture, which I also disapproved of. Matt Taibbi, formerly of the Rolling Stone, he's written extensively about how the Central Intelligence Agency and other intelligence services, there go the fighter planes again, other intelligence services were uh, working with the tech companies to censor information on the internet. The United States is openly encouraging the Europeans to pass censorship laws that go way beyond what we have here just because they don't have a First Amendment in Europe. And they can go much further than we've gone. And so really the whole idea of free speech as a principled position almost seems like a thing of the past. And we only criticize people for censorship when our side is being affected. And that's very wrong. I mean, you have to basically, indeed, if you believe in free speech, yes, you do have to accept that ugly, vile people like the Proud Boys or George Wallace, they have a right to free speech too. And the problem is, if you ban George Wallace, the next thing is they will ban you. That's how it works. And so the best solution to that is just stick to the principle that people can say anything they want.
So, but now we're looking at prison time for people, making them felons.
Yeah.
We're looking at expelling kids from school,
Yeah.
denying them their degrees,
Yes.
Their credentials that can pave the way, not make the way, because at some point it would certainly make it harder for them, but they could make it anyway. Being put out of schools. What are we to make of this moment? I mean, because there's got to be something that can be done, Dr. Gibbs. Because have we ever had this kind of pushback on free speech in the United States? Now, mind you, I will say Dr. King was denied his right to speak freely.
Yep.
Because he was harassed unto death by our government. Now, that's real. We can't act as if this is not part of what we do. But there's something else to me going on here. I don't know. And Mildred Banks is saying hello to you and to me. Hey, hey, hey. And what do you make of this?
It's a new era. Until about 10 years ago, I never had these problems in the classroom. And generally speaking, there was a consensus that part of the American identity is the right to free speech. We enshrined the First Amendment. We were proud of the First Amendment. And we more or less acted on the issue as if we believed in the First Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
That changed. I think the first thing that happened was that Donald Trump was elected, and the Democrats went crazy, to be honest. I think it damaged a lot of people's brains. They couldn't think straight. I mean, I understand people were upset about it. I was upset about it too. You have to think straight. And one of the things that happened is they became convinced that the reason that Trump won is because there was a conspiracy by Russia, by Vladimir Putin, to put him in power. And this was a complete fantasy. And they then began using classic McCarthyism as a means, basically, to try and advance their position, and McCarthyism is deeply hostile to free speech. Obviously, if you say something, for example, we should have better relations with Russia, which I strongly favor, I've always favored that, well, I must be an agent of Vladimir Putin. That's a great way to damage my reputation and shut me up. That's the whole purpose of it. So I think basically it began with that. It began with Russiagate. The whole notion that the Democrats didn't lose because they had a bad candidate and a bad campaign. They lost touch with ordinary Americans, which is it was clear as day the reason they lost in 2016. And instead they came up with a wild conspiracy theory that foreign interference by a foreign power caused Trump to be elected. And then anything that happened, a power plant in Vermont failed. It must have been a Russian conspiracy.
Oh.
And that kind of atmosphere, free speech is bound to suffer, and it did suffer. And then it began spreading like a cancer. Once you start this process, it spreads like a cancer. And now it's being used by the Republicans. Surprise, surprise. They're getting in on the act. And so I think that what we've had here is part of the toxic feature of American politics that has been associated with the rise of Trumpism. Has certainly affected the Republican Party in very noxious and ugly ways, but it's also affected the Democratic Party and also the activist left, which is where I come from, in ways that it just led to a rise of irrationality. With irrationality, you get efforts basically at political repression and coercion. And with that comes a rejection of free speech. And now we're seeing the full consequences of it, which means that we can't discuss, for example, this vitally important issue of America's support for Israel, including support for killing hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, and what does that do to us when that discussion is shut down? I mean, in America, because I'm asking you that this is the frame, and we've got Daryl Jones waiting in the backstage, and because I want you to speak to this too. It's just like an infection in the body.
Yeah.
You can press it down,
Mm-hmm.
but it pops up someplace else.
That's right.
And I had two of our dear friends, really family of this show, Ariel Gold and Rachel Ida Buff, who's one of your colleagues at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. Mm-hmm. And they both said, as Jewish American people, they said, we're very worried, as Jewish people now, because we feel like we are in danger. And I had to ask him, whoa, wait a minute. Because whenever someone says that, I want to stop and say, well, okay, because if there's something that we can say, something we can do to allay your fears, I'm going to try and do that. That having been said, they said, no, they are pushing so far that this is endangering us all. And the discussion is going to go somewhere. I'm reading comments. To me, the comments after an article in a newspaper or magazine are more fascinating.
Yeah.
Than what is read. Maybe that's why I love watching Washington Journal on C-SPAN, because I get a chance to hear the unfiltered. I think whoever's calling in and whoever's writing in, I think you got to pay attention. So where does this dissent go? Because it's here.
Repression doesn't work mostly. When you repress something, you try and force it underground, and it just leads to resentment and causes a backlash. I think Russiagate, apart from being just noxious and absurd
and wrong,
that's right. It didn't do anything to damage Donald Trump. It basically, people imagine, they fantasize that somehow this would just knock Trump out of the ring. It didn't do anything of the sort. It just emboldened his supporters and made them feel oppressed. It made them feel aggrieved. It made them feel threatened, and it increased support for him, is my sense of things. And it's amazing the Democrats hadn't figured that out. Just iteration after iteration of things they did. It had no effect except increasing Trump's popularity. And one of these things is efforts to repress speech. And now it's coming back. Well, I mean, the Democrats also repress speech about Israel Palestine. There's no question about that. And now the Republicans are doing it even more. And I guess I am critical of my friends on the activist left who did favor repression of speech on things like trans rights, favored repression of speech related to a whole range of issues. It's hate speech, it's and disinformation. They got on that bandwagon as well. And now that they want to demonstrate, and rightly and should demonstrate, against what America is doing in the Middle East in terms of backing Israel, now they're complaining that they're being repressed, that their speech is being threatened. And they have a right to complain about that, but I do see some hypocrisy and some sense of lack of balance here, that once you create the precedent that it's okay to repress speech, it's going to spread like a cancer. And don't be surprised if it comes back to bite you, which is what happens. People on the left, I think, often forget that repression of speech, that's the power, that's for the very powerful, right? And we should not pretend that it's anything but for the very powerful. And for people who are oppositional to advocate for repression of speech, is inevitably going to result in harm to them, and we're seeing that now. So I guess I'm being a little bit critical of some of my colleagues here, who are them. One could call me somebody who's now blaming the victim, because these people are victims, but sometimes the victim deserves a little blame, because I think this whole idea basically of cancel culture, this was very popular on the left.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see here a generalized breakdown of support for free speech that's very much bipartisan in character, and extends beyond the parties to activist groups, including groups I mostly support.
Yeah, but we don't have the space to speak openly, and I think that puts us in a dangerous place. I don't know where that puts. Have we as a nation ever been here historically?
Yeah, the early 50s, McCarthyism. We've definitely been here before. And so that's one of the things that bothered me about this period. It reminded me a great deal historically of the Red Scare, of the period of blacklists, the period of the Smith Act, which imprisoned people, of J. Edgar Hoover. A lot of this reminds me of that very much. And we have also the Democrats' love affair with the intelligence services, including the FBI and the CIA. And these are agencies deeply hostile to free speech, fundamentally, that are also hostile to privacy. Edward Snowden revealed that very dramatically, I think. And Edward Snowden, of course, is a fugitive from the law. He has to live in Moscow. He can't leave because he'd be arrested. He'd spend the rest of his life in prison because he did a public service. And so it's just it's an error. Of course, in Julian Assange, we know he was effectively in prison for a decade, basically for doing the public service, for ensuring the public's right to know. So this is an atmosphere with very little pushback, remarkably little pushback, I should add. And so I just see this as a very repressive era. And it's not a very comfortable era to write critically, in which to write critically or to speak critically.
It's a very difficult time. What would you like to say before you go?
I think people need to get back to a principled right to free speech. And that means a generalized right to free speech, including for people you don't like and even detest and fear, because that's what free speech is. And we need basically people not to be selective in their enforcement of free speech.
I hear you. Because if it's going to be free, you can't be. You can't be selective. You have to take it all.
Yeah.
And you have to, and that's why I'm trying to encourage, respectful dialogue. You don't have to agree.
You do that on the show. That's right.
Yeah, I try to do that. That's why even, with the family, I've had some people who say, I support Trump. Good. I hear you.
Yeah.
Good for you. We don't have to agree on whom we support, but we do need to agree that he's the president and you respect the office. You don't have to like the person, but everybody, we've got to work. I mean, and you could and get out in March and do some things because guess what? I mean, we have a lot of things that are coming down the pike, and not to be able to ask questions without being called a conspiracy theorist, or construct constructs that make sense to us without being called a conspiracist, without being called a little loony, a liar. That's we have to get away from that. Dr. David Gibbs, who the revolt of the rich, that Tesla driving up on that lawn. I said, Dr. Gibbs, this is what he said was going to happen. And oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that strange looking car was sitting up there on the White House lawn. I can't make it. I just can't. This is too much. Sending you so much love.
Bye bye.
Gibbs.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye. Daryl Jones, Attorney Daryl Jones, Chairman of the Transformative Justice Coalition. Of course, every Tuesday, you are on WOL in Washington, D.C., WOLDC, with Attorney Barbara Arnwine on your show, 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. Welcome home.
Thank you so much, Santita. So great to be here.
Well, I wanted to ask you, let's look at within the framework of free speech, because we talked about Mahmoud Khalil, but I'm connecting it to the MSNBC firing Joy Reid, and others, and others, and moving. She's out the building. Others have stayed and they're being plugged into other roles at the station. So it was clear they wanted her gone. But we're watching. You're seeing people leave legacy media, journalists, so that they can tell the stories. They're, really pushing on their Substacks and in social media because they said, we just can't trust what we're seeing. And if you notice, in legacy media, in corporate media, because we keep trying to come up with fancy names for it, call it what it is corporate media. Corporate media. You only have pundits who push the official line. We don't even have freedom of thought there. We really don't. And so I want to know from you, what about this young man? I mean, because there are more. Trump said, as we talked about yesterday, he said, "Oh, there's much more to come. Many, many more to come." They're planning to expel students, charge them criminally, put them in prison, deport people who are legally here, who might be on track for citizenship. Certainly, this young man is a permanent resident. What do you make of that?
Well, Santita, it's really interesting because, I think that during the campaign, when Vice President Harris was running against President Trump, much of the call that went out was the signaling to America that if he became president, that there would be this strong iron hold that would be placed on our country, and that a lot of our democratic principles would be at risk. And what we're seeing happen now is precisely what was being worried about then. And, when it comes to the First Amendment and Mahmoud Khalil, a lot of what we're seeing is, he is simply the figurehead that they want to put out there to show what will happen to anyone that is in a similarly situated position if they buck the administration, if they go against the interest of the administration. That's what Mahmoud Khalil represents. And what we see happening there, and it's just, I feel so sorry for him and the family, because what we see happening there is this young guy who's, is the graduate student, et cetera. He's not simply arrested and detained, but he's arrested, detained, and removed. He's no longer in New York. He's now in Louisiana. So he's not near his family or anything. His wife's 8 months pregnant. So all of these things that are coming out now is sort of a showing of the administration of strength. I think that, you know, if you're dealing with an authoritarian type of government, totalitarian type of government, that you end up wanting to see emerge the strong hand, which is what the Trump Musk ticket here is showing, is the strong hand of how they're going to erode democracy. And the question is, do people have the strength? Do they have the fortitude? Do they have the courage to stand up against what he's throwing at them? Because that's precisely what they're counting on, is that people will cower, that the students will cower, that they will back down, and they'll do the anticipatory compliance and just be in compliance with obedience to whatever the administration wants to have happen. So that's the concern. That's what's going on now. It's a complete affront to the First Amendment, as far as I can see. It's consistent with, you know, the saddest part, I think, is what we see coming from the commercial, you know, corporate, however you want to call it, the media, MSNBC and the followers. Because when you start getting rid of the voices of dissent, right, you get rid of those that are questioning the power of the government, the Joy Reids that raise the question, the Ayman Moyadeen who question it, just raising the questions. When you start demoting them and removing them, that really does create a problem, because the message then that's being sent is that the head of the government really can tamper down and hold down voices of dissent.
But yeah, we saw this with Dr. King. I mean, let's be very, very clear. We saw, well, we didn't see, but certainly our parents saw. I have to ask my parents, how did you get through the 60s? I don't know how you did it, because every time you turned around, somebody got killed. You know, my mother said, you know, with Kennedy's death, with John F. Kennedy's death, she said everything came apart. The wheels came off. I said, really? Because she said, yeah. She said, because Dr. King said, I won't make it through the decade. If they killed him, they're going to kill me. And I know this. I'm going to keep on going, but I know that's what they're going to do. And they did. But that was just a swath of people. And not just our Black liberators. I mean, it just people who dissented. You had Catholic priests who dissented who were killed. I mean, so let's be very clear. This is where this can go. Can you explain to me what is the justification for sending this young man to Louisiana? You're a former prosecutor, so you understand how prosecutors think, and you understand the process. First of all, because his wife, my heart broke for her. She was on television holding a press conference. Or should I say that they were covering a press conference in which she was speaking. And she said, you know, they basically broke into my house and took my husband. I said, oh my gosh, wait a minute. And then they so far away, she can't get to him.
Right.
At 8 months pregnant, she's really not supposed to travel. And I've never been pregnant, you all, but I know people who have been, people very close to me. And the closer you get to your due date, I saw my mother pregnant. I remember 2 of them anyway. And she, you know, my father said, no. That last trimester, and certainly that last month, your mother did not travel after 5 months. That was it. And she wasn't doing a whole lot of moving in the last couple of months. So this woman is, for the sake of their child, has to stay put. She also should not be put under undue stress, because that can hurt her and her baby. Why put him in Louisiana? What is that about?
Well, you know,
it's a world away.
It is a world away, and it's another form of that punishment. It's another form of showing that strength. That, you know, look, you all don't want to come up against this machine, because we will get rid of you. We will send you away from your family, and whatever stresses exist, they exist. But that's what we want to show. Typically, what happens in the federal system is that when a person is detained or put into detention, they want to usually try to keep them, you know, close to the courthouse where they're going to be occurring, in the area where things occur. They usually try to keep them in that general area. That's not what they did here. You know, what they did here is they went from New York to Louisiana. They wanted to send the message. In the federal system and the Bureau of Prisons, they have the opportunity to send you wherever they want to send you, wherever a prison exists. What they traditionally try to do is to try to keep you close to your family, close to people that know you. But at the same time, if they believe that you possess or pose some type of risk of causing an uprising of some sort, of causing commotion because of your political messaging or whatever in an area, they may try to move you out a little bit so that the influence is less. But in this situation, I don't think any of the political messaging, or being concerned that he's going to be starting a riot or anything like that in the prison, none of that existed. What did exist was the fact that they really wanted to send the message to other students that, you don't want to follow this guy's lead. Otherwise, we will do to you what we have done to him. That's the message that they were sending. It becomes really scary, though, Santita, on another level, because what we've seen coming from this administration as well is that they're beginning to go after the lawyers that represent these folks as well, and they begin to investigate the attorneys, so that the attorneys then become a little gun shy as to whether or not they want to get involved in any of these cases. So that's a large part of what we're seeing happening. It's a rough handing, it certainly is a rough housing with regards to heavy-handed politics, heavy-handed litigation that we see that's going on. It's going to be interesting to see what the courts do with this. We know that for now that he's going to be remaining. Khalil's going to be remaining in Louisiana, according to the judges at this point.
Does a detained person have any rights? I mean, when my brother was in prison, they put him in North Carolina, which was fair enough. It was easy enough for us to access. Not easy, but hey, somebody did it every week. But when you got down to Alabama, getting down to Alabama is not that simple. I mean, a direct flight, a nonstop flight into Birmingham, no. You got to go to Atlanta. And then you have to change over. The direct nonstop flights are rare. And it's to me, they put you away so that people can't get to you.
Mm-hmm.
And they take you out of your network. You get unplugged, which is dangerous to me.
Well, ordinarily, for most federal folks that end up being incarcerated, they're incarcerated locally. They want to keep them as close to the home state as they can.
Why?
For those purposes, because they find that if there's an inmate that has family contact, that has people coming to visit him or her, that they're less likely to be problematic in the institution. That it calms the mind down some. But it's when you have people that are isolated and feel as though they have they can do what they want to do. They're away from everybody. There's no contact. There's just the psychological side of it that you become angrier. You become more isolated. You become more desperate. That you may then act out. That's part of the reason I believe that they try to keep people local to the states where their crimes are committed and where they're convicted, or where they have contacts. That's typically what they would want to do. When they start sending them away, there's usually all kinds of political reasons that can lay in there. Whether it's that they want to get them away from their base, they want to get them away from those that that could support them politically. Whatever that may be, there are all other kinds of reasons that are there to send folks out.
I gotta stop you. The Black Muslims, they recruit in prison. He has got some people, and you do have Nazis in prison too, but some of them have been energized.
Mm-hmm.
So why would you send him? That's not smart. He's got some people in there, like Luigi Mangione.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're not. No one's celebrating the killing of Brian Thompson, but so many people have been denied claims, and they've been treated so horrifically by these companies as you pay them and you pay them and you pay them, and they pay you back by denying you life-saving coverage or coverage that can make your life easier.
Mm-hmm.
Really? So let's stop playing. He is not walking into. My point is, I think he's got at least a part of that audience on lock in that
Mhm.
prison.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. You know, when you're dealing with someone like Luigi, there's going to be a lot of sentiment that comes with him, a lot of positive sentiment that comes with him, and you're going to have certainly inmates that are there, other prisoners that are there. They're going to be supportive to a certain degree. And so, that happens. That's a part of the culture within the prison. That happens. Yeah, you're even going to have guards that are there that are going to be supportive of Luigi Maggione, and the quest, not the killing, but the quest to take on the healthcare and the medical coverage of people. That cuts across all kinds of barriers. So you have those issues that exist. Similarly, right, when we're dealing with Mahmoud Khalil, you're going to have all kinds of things that are cut across there, all kinds of issues and people that have feelings with regards to the Palestinians as opposed to Israel. So you're going to have all of that also that's being laid out. I believe he'll probably be, treated, well, to the degree you can be treated well in the federal institution. But I think that he'll be safe. But the question for him right now becomes the separation from him and his family, and the stress that's going to have on his wife, on the unborn child, and on him.
And that's what they intend to do. Is that not cruel and unusual punishment?
Yeah, by my markings, I certainly would say that it's cruel and unusual. Does it meet the legal definition for being cruel and unusual? That would probably not, because when you're dealing with the Bureau of Prisons, so long as you can put the person in a situation where where their life isn't being threatened and they're secure, it's not going to be cruel and unusual. But in terms of just the layman's terminology of dealing cruel and unusual, it certainly has that appearance.
Hmm. So, what do you all think, everybody? And thank you, Carol. Beautiful blue outfit. Somebody else made notice of my rings. I love that. Yes, yes, yes. You see that. Um, so, hmm, is there anything that he can do? I mean, there's no moving him now, is there?
He can always be moved. He can be moved, and part of what works against him is not being a U.S. citizen. Part of what works in his favor is his being a student, and having members of Congress that may be willing to step up and try to press the Bureau of Prisons to try to have him move closer to his family. He certainly can make that request to be moved closer to his family. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me with regards to where they have him, with regards to the process that he will have to go through, because when he goes through his hearings, typically they would take him back to the place where it all started for hearings. So it's going to be interesting to see how they work there. Are they going to try to move the jurisdiction so that everything happens in Louisiana? I just don't know the answer to that question. But certainly now would be time for him and his attorney and to use any political means that they can to try to get him moved closer to his family.
I just don't. Well, I do understand it. I really do. It's harassment, and it's designed to deter. I just think, Attorney Jones, that in this current environment, deterrents are going to push people forward, particularly during this high holy season for Muslims. I don't know if he's Muslim, but it's Ramadan.
Mm-hmm.
And I cannot help but believe that his persecution at this time means a whole lot to that community. I know it means a lot to mine and to me, because I see what's happening to him as horrifically unjust. It's not that I wasn't expecting it, because these people have been pushing on legislation that that I knew would be harmful. But I mean, before we go, I've got a couple minutes. What can we do now? And I want you to call your representative on the House and Democrats and Republicans, whoever is representing you. I don't care if you voted for them or not. Call them and let them know that you want them to work on a freedom plan for this young man. Well, talk to me. I mean, what recourse do we have? What should we do?
I think there are a couple of things that we should do. One is what you just called out, is to call into Congress at the 202-224-3121 and note your objection to what's happening with him. Call your member of Congress. When you call the 202-224-3121 number, they'll be able to direct you to your member of Congress. You can speak directly to your congressional member's office and let them know your position with regards to Mahmoud Khalil and his quest for freedom and be reconnected with his family. Certainly do that. That's a part of what needs to be done. The other part of what needs to be done is that we've got to be certain that we connect ourselves with political organizations, churches, to get the word out that we need to be active at this point in time. Interestingly, what the administration right now is counting on is that their heavy-handedness with Khalil, with Mahmoud Khalil, will have the result of suppressing others that are from that community from becoming active, from wanting to become active at all, they're wanting to demonstrate at all. They're hoping that it'll put their thumb on the scale and hold back college students from wanting to protest. That's what they're hoping this will do. It's got to have the exact opposite effect. You've got to feel empowered. You've got to believe enough to go out and to have those protests and to put it back in their face, to let them know that you're not going to be put down because of their actions with regards to illegal actions, as far as I'm concerned, what they've done to Brother Khalil. So it's so important right now, I think, to join those groups, to be in the streets, to be on the phone, to be sending the emails, letting folks know, letting everybody know that this is not acceptable behavior. The other side of that is, if we do not do this, if we do not do what I call the Congressman Al Green, where he raises the cane, right? He raises the cane to say, I object. No, this is wrong. We've got to be as courageous as Congressman Al Green and raise that cane to say that this is wrong. I'm not going to stand for it. It's not going to happen in my presence, not while I'm here. And that's what I believe needs to happen now, is that we need to collectively come together and say, for our democracy's sake, not while I'm here, we won't have this, Santita.
Well, amen to that. Attorney Darrell Jones, chairman of the Transformative Justice Coalition. Of course, every Tuesday on WOLDC. Everybody, you don't have to live in Washington. You don't have to live in the DMZ. You do not have to live there to hear this great radio show from 12 noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Tuesday on WOLDC. And everybody get involved. Get involved. We've got to, and especially when you don't like what someone has to say, you got to protect it. You've got to protect it. You're going to say something with which people will find disagreement. You should not be locked away. You shouldn't be locked away. Think about that. The implications are profound. They are profound. And so we're praying for the Khalil family. They are a family. Praying for them and praying that he remains strong. So everybody, let's talk about Rahm Emanuel. Did you hear about this, Attorney Darrell Jones? He's looking at running for president. That was a big political the big political discussion will be in the next hour. Everybody, just cool your jets. We'll be back in another hour so that we can talk about that. Running for president. We knew he was up to something last week. We knew it. And he has always said that he wants to be president of the United States. Can that happen? Anything's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Should it happen? Let's talk about it on the Santita Jackson Show. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Back in just a moment.